10 years now running the Key Center for Civil Rights, doing a focus study on race and racism in Detroit. And I often say that the mission of the Key Center is to take very seriously that structural racism is our generation's civil rights challenge. And let me give you a definition of structural racism that I want you to have to think about in the process, what Professor Gross was saying, through that lens of systems thinking, system design. Right? So the definition of structural racism we use here is the inter-institutional dynamics that produce and reproduce racially disparate outcomes over time. Right? That's a mouthful, right? So let's start backwards with a racially disparate outcome. Pick up any of those statistics that you're talking about, differential treatment by race, which are endemic, as Professor Gross is showing, in the criminal justice system. Right? You can also have racially disparate outcomes in health and in wealth and in welfare, right? All sorts of other issues. So you're saying, what is the inter-institutional dynamics, right? How does the criminal justice system interact with the education system, interact with the housing system to produce that racially disparate outcome, right? And then to reproduce it over time? And I think if you start using that structural analysis and going beyond even the criminal justice system, he's talking about transportation and who gets pulled over. He's talking about a black area of town. Well, that can't be thought about without thinking about housing patterns and housing discrimination. Right? So you start thinking about the interinstitutional dynamics that lead to that. I think you start to be in a setting to both understand, right? How do these things come together? Right? How does misidentification happen with the acceptance of false field testing, happen with the acceptance of targeting the criminal justice system at certain populations and not others? And then widen out from that as you're thinking about the policy implications. If you're taking a system-based understanding of the root causes of the problem, you're also going to have a radically different understanding about the types of reforms that are appropriate given the diagnosis of a systemic failure as opposed to an isolated notion. Right? And then sometimes you have to start taking deeper breaths. Right? Where does that take us? One deeper breath would take you first to the notion that, well, maybe the system's not broken. Right? Complicated systems that have all these smart people and all this experience and all these centuries of being produced don't just run awry because of things going wrong. Right? Maybe the system is producing exactly what the broader society wants it to produce. Right? And in that perspective, you're documenting errors that are certainly errors given the framework that you've accepted and put on it normatively, but may not be errors. Right? Then if you peel back another, take a deep breath, think about historically of the role of the criminal justice system, criminology, policing, in order to create and maintain systems of systemic racism. And it's my opinion, and I say this not being the expertise that people have in this room, there's probably no more important institution than the criminal justice system and the police state that have created racial inequality in our country from its very inception. Right? And we can't think of any contemporary issue of criminal injustice without looking at that long history of the way in which the system has been used to police, as we were doing a session, a series of talks, policing minds. Right? It creates the way we think about people who we categorize as a threat, policing bodies, mechanisms of social control, and policing boundaries. What are safe areas and what are not safe areas? If we're not thinking about those simultaneously, we're not looking at the complexity of the problem. And what's great work with Sam does, and has done with his career, is really fine attention to detail. Right? These are not alternative facts. This is not fake news. This is very carefully studied, very sort of thoughtfully analyzed notions where you can point to things like an MRI of our society and start seeing where racism is taking place, right? In a very concrete, very sophisticated way that should be shaking people up. Right? Two more quick things and then I'll turn the mic over. One is that you have to start getting your own mindset to be thinking about the production and reproduction of racial inequality. Right? This is not isolated. It's an incredibly important case study. You do it here, then you have to be able to do it elsewhere. So start thinking about how systems get produced, how they get reproduced, and how that's part of this interinstitutional dynamics. Right? That should be a habit of mind that we can all aspire to create and will substantially change the way we think about criminal justice systems, as well as health systems, as well as job systems, as well as education systems. The last thing I would say would just sort of be a precursor to discussions about what are the implications, what are the reforms, where do we go from here? And that would be to distinguish between what I would call assimilationist reforms, right, and anti-racist reforms. Right? Assimilationist reforms would go through and say, well, we really got to fix the bail system, and we should. Right? We got to fix the problems with eyewitness identification, and we should. We got to deal with plea bargaining problems, and we should. We got to deal with bad cops, and we should. right? But those are assimilationist kinds of reforms to try to put window dressing on a system that itself may be deeply flawed and racist, right? When you take an anti-racist perspective, you've got to be seeking reforms that are transformational. So if the end state that you're looking at is not transformational when dealing with an issue of race, but rather assimilationist, you're not necessarily asking the right question and pushing yourself in the right direction. So that's my soapbox.
So I'm going to take a tack that's very similar to Peter's, but looking at it from a somewhat different perspective. The thing that struck me most when I was reading Sam's paper is there's a very, he didn't get to all of it, there's a very thoughtful and nuanced account of the different roles that race plays in Sam's paper. The question I kept asking myself was why? And I want to start with a story. I was working at the legal defense fund in the early 80s. There was a young man in Georgia who was one of these people, young characters that I really admired. He was a fervent anti-death penalty advocate. He had worked doing anti-death penalty, I think with the reformers, I remember, in Georgia. He was in law school. And then he graduated and he's working for a state court judge in southeast Georgia, Tappan County, which is a little bit west of Savannah. It's where the biggest prison is in Georgia. And he goes to his judge and he says, you know, I really want to continue doing pro bono death penalty work while I'm working for you. Are you okay with that? Which struck me as a weird thing to do because when you're working for a judge, I would think that the default assumption would be you don't do any kind of adversary work because the judge has to appear to be impartial. The judge, instead of saying no, surprisingly says, well, gee, I don't really care. If it's okay with the State Bar of Georgia, it's okay with me. So let's ask the ethics committee if you can do this. It's very unusual. I don't know if it did know the judge, but an unusual person. So they make a formal application to the ethics committee of the State Bar of Georgia, and they render an opinion saying, no, you can't do it. Right? That's not so weird because I've already talked about the appearance of impartiality supported to the judge. But what's really striking about this, and I kept it, I have it somewhere in the file upstairs, I'm not sure I can find it, is the rationale. They said it would be a conflict of interest. Not compromising the impartiality of the judge, be a conflict of interest. Why? Because the policy of the state under the capital punishment statute is to execute people. And the judge works for the state. And his job is to see that the capital punishment is carried out. And I know it's unbelievable to put this in print, right? But that tells you something about the system, right? How the system is here. It's actually not a new insight. Writing in the common law, Holmes said out of Chief Justice Lemuel Shaw, excuse me, who was sort of the most important common law judge in the first half of the 19th century. He said, quote, I always, that's not the right quote, for the strength of that great judge, Lemuel Shaw, lay an accurate appreciation of the requirements of the community whose officer he was. Right? After that talks about the role of public policy in his opinions, but Shaw, of course, famously was a hanging judge. He presided over Commonwealth versus Webster, which was the most controversial capital punishment case of the 19th century, not just in the United States, but internationally. The trial was covered in London and Paris and Berlin. Shaw was accused widely in the press of essentially directing a verdict against the defendant, and I'll say a little bit more about that a little bit later. So, why do I tell this story? Because I think at the end of the day, it's not a bug, it's a feature. Why do we have so many wrongful convictions? It's not a mistake. And it's not like, we should not infer that if we got rid of the racist cops like Tom Coleman, we'd solve the problem. Or if we somehow reformed the problems of eyewitness testimony, we'd resolve the problem. The system is set up to do this. Right? Because the chief purpose of the system, this is money in the criminal justice system, is to maintain order. And if you're setting up a system to maintain order, the people you're going to be policing, I'm not using the term wrongly, are going to be the lower classes. And in a society where the economic hierarchy is also racialized, then it's going to be the minority group, whatever that days, the same thing goes on with the photograph in the class, and whatever the ethnic or the racial differences might be, those will appear in the same way. I want to step, that's my main point. I want to step back from the criminal justice context for a moment to give you a sense of how pervasive I think this thing really is. So part of the question of asking why is, not why, but sort of related to why the next question I asked myself is, well, what could you do to fix it, right? We can get rid of eyewitness testimony. Which state is it? New Jersey? New Jersey Supreme Court did something about it.
Yes, New Jersey.
Yeah. We've known since I was in college, I was in college in the early 70s, that eyewitness testimony is wildly unreliable, not even worse, interracial, but even intraracial. We've known this for forever. The system does nothing about it, right? We tend to think of the legal system, our legal system in particular, as one sensitive to the states, one founded in the due process, and part of our sort of basic understanding of the due process is the greater the stakes, the more process we want to get, the more careful we ought to be not to make mistakes, right? And we sometimes do that, but do shining examples, of course, are it's only in criminal cases that we give people state-appointed counsel, if they can't afford counsel, and of course, everybody, all lay people know, the criminal justice system has something proven beyond a reasonable doubt. It's the highest standard of proof. Except that everywhere else in the criminal justice system, there's a lower standard. Think about discovery. In civil cases, we have very extensive discovery. And one of the things that Sam's paper, not the party talked about here today, talks about is the violation of the Brady Rule, which is a constitutional rule that requires the prosecution to turn over exculpatory evidence, frequently honored in the breach. But that's it. Most places have no discovery. You don't get to find out what the case is going to be against you until you get to trial, or a very limited amount, right? And the cops fight you for that. Why don't we have discovery in criminal cases? We should have more discovery in criminal cases, just right, the higher the stakes, the more. So discovery would be something that might fit in North Carolina for a while. That open discovery, and what I know about it worked pretty well, though the Republicans took over the legislature some years ago. They got rid of it. So across the board, in many ways, we have less process, and the reason is because conviction is the name of the game. It doesn't really matter who gets convicted, as long as we convict a lot of people. That sounds silly and simplistic, of course, but the reason is that the system is about maintaining order. And so across the board, corners get cut, right? The legal rules are less protective. Discovery is the best example. I can take it. The other really strong example, our late colleague, Aaron Bichomonis, wrote about this. In civil cases, the standard of scientific evidence is extremely high, known as the Daubert standard, after the case of Daubert case. In criminal cases, they don't apply that. Pretty much everything goes in, right? Care experts testify that they can identify the race of the defendant, or even more specifically by the hair, before DNA testing. There are white mark experts who testify. This, by the way, has a story. This would be Commonwealth Webster, the 1850 case. Before, Oliver Wendell Holmes' father, who was a doctor, testified all they had left of the victim was his jaw. His femur, his jaw, and one other bone, that was it, the body. And Oliver Wendell Holmes, Dr. Holmes, testified that the jaw was not unlike the jaw of the victim. As an expert witness, and that was good enough. That's literally what he said, not dissimilar. So we have a much lower standard. I had a case of death row. Followed Voltaire. With 90% certainty they testified that the defendant was, I'm sorry, that the perpetrator was acting there. And all that stuff is completely discredited. Scientific. So we actually have a very low standard. So what's going on here? It's a different vision of the law than the one we teach in law school. And it's a different vision of the law than the Peter called the assimilationist view. I would sort of say I'm not trying to be editor, but the sense that if you only tinker with a few things that's wrong, we'll fix it. This is sort of a liberal reform kind of view. But the system, I think, is shot through. So let me just, this comes from Robert Cover, who's writing not about the criminal justice system, but about courts in general. And he contrasts a case called Walker versus City of Birmingham. Some of you may know it. This is one of the two cases that arose out of the Birmingham demonstrations in the early 1960s. You've seen the video of the fire over the middle. It was those demonstrations. In Shuttlesworth versus the City of Birmingham, which was actually decided later, the Supreme Court held that the injunction against the march was unconstitutional, violating the First Amendment. In the Walker case, the court upheld the contempt convictions of Reverend Walker and others who demonstrated notwithstanding the injunction. The argument was the injunction is unconstitutional because the statute violates the First Amendment. How can we uphold the contempt? The Supreme Court took the position it doesn't matter. When the court issues an order, you have to follow it regardless. And Cover contrasts the Walker case with then three cases of over many more now. I'll refer to those now. I'll wrap. Rizzo versus Good, which was a challenge to police brutality in Philadelphia in the 1970s, which the Supreme Court threw out. Miller versus Harris, which was an attempt to enjoin unconstitutional prosecutions. The Supreme Court said you couldn't do that. And then Los Angeles versus Lyons, which involved, this was pre-Rodney King, the use of chokeholds by the Los Angeles Police Department, which they used fairly routinely on mostly African Americans for routine traffic stops, and often killed, not always, but often killed. Actually very hard to do right, very easy to block the order. Brain death. So now I'm just going to read a brief passage from the cover. It says, Walker stands for a strong view of equity. The court's authority derives ultimately from the conception of the equity judge as guarantor of the social order. We must have near absolute authority to put a stop to the disorders of collective action guided by law or interests other than those of the state. Walker tells the judge that the court's authority is greater than its warranted interpretation. Even when wrong, the judge is to act and is entitled to be obeyed. The signal Walker sends the judge is to be aggressive in confronting private resistance because his authority will be vindicated even if in error. The rules of Rizzo, Young, and Lyons are the rules of judges as potential outsiders looking in at state violence. And the question is whether judicial interpretations that circumscribe the authority of the builders of state violence will be given full effect. Jurisdictional principles require the judge. Judges' interpretations be given less than their intrinsic authority. And so he concludes, equity is strong when the court is aligned with state violence and weak when the court is accountable to that violence. Rizzo, of course, involved police brutality, as did Lyons. If you think about Black Lives Matter, Marvin referred to the case that I argued in the Supreme Court in the 1980s, Tennessee versus Warner. The Supreme Court struck down the Commonwealth State Felon Rule. The Supreme Court said, as a matter of the Constitution, you require a very good reason of equal weight to the life of the person that the shooting is. Only when the person has committed a violent crime or is threatening violence can you use deadly force. But what the hell happened here? Right? If that had been observed, if that had been enforced by the court, we wouldn't be having the shootings that we have, right? Black Lives Matter. But of course, the court then systematically undermined it. Right? It didn't happen in a vacuum. In a series of cases, the Supreme Court basically sent a message to the police: we're not going to second guess when you shoot. My favorite one is when I don't remember the name of the case. I meant to look it up this morning before I came in, but the case in Memphis where they shot 45 times after the person was already dead. And Justice Alito said, well, once you start shooting, you got to keep shooting until the thing is over. Strikingly, even the liberals agreed with most of the opinion. They only disagreed. Three justices, Ginsburg and two of the others, dissented on the last 45 shots. That was really excessive. So what signal is that sent? Well, in a system that works like that, right, a real thief are not a surprise, and that the disproportionate effect African Americans, that's not a surprise either, because that's who the system is designed to police. So I think it's not a bug, it's a feature, and I think all those reforms should be made, but I don't have a transformation with you either, but I think it would have to be. I think the criminal justice system, since where I part a little bit with Peter, reflects the society that we are. We have to transform the society first before we can transform the system.
Professor Gross has briefly mentioned about immigration, and that's something I'm going to discuss. So, U.S. is a nation of immigrants. The issues of race and immigration has often intersect to shape people's experience. Right? And when we talk about immigrants, they could be in the country for visa, temporary stay. They could be here with a permanent status, resident status, or they could be here with undocumentation, illegal immigrants. And when these individuals were wrongfully convicted, oftentimes their legal visa or legal resident permanent status were revoked. So at the end of the day, after they were released, they will actually become illegal immigrants. So we see cases where exonerees, once they are announced, vacated by the court, they didn't get a chance to go outside, enjoy the sunlight and fresh air. They were sent back to detention center. They were detained by ICE, and they are facing deportation. So these immigrants, they are predominantly racial and ethnic minorities. They could be Latino, such as Ricardo Rodriguez from Cook County, Illinois. They could be Asian, such as David Wong from New York City. And they could be Black, such as Jules Latemps from Orlando, Florida. So for these individuals, they face additional unique difficulties when they interact with legal authorities. Right? They could suffer the double jeopardy as a racial ethnic minority, and also as a foreign-born individuals. Many of these individuals, they do not speak good or any English. For example, some immigrants, domestic violence victims, they are wrongfully arrested in dual arrest situations because there are no proper interpreters. So the perpetrators actually serve as the interpreter in these cases. Many immigrants also do not have formal education. Often they barely know anything about the U.S. law and the legal system, so they are very scared about getting involved in the CJ system. And when they were eventually involved, they cannot defend themselves, and they do not have the right or enough resources to have good counsel and other good support. So for these immigrants, exoneration is not the end of the story. Taken out of prison, only to be put back on custody again, facing a potential deportation. And Professor Winter and Hammer also talk about the why issue, right? So the advantage or disadvantage for immigrant minority exonerees start when they first got involved with the criminal justice system. So I'm a policing scholar, and we know the history of policing is full of examples of this conflict between local police and immigrant ethnic minorities. And even today, we sometimes still hear these terms such as criminal aliens, terrorist suspects, and other criminalizing rhetoric in public media, and including some of the politicians, they are talking about criminal aliens. So this can mislead the public, including some police officers, to believe that undocumented immigrants are disproportionately criminal. And as a matter of fact, a lot of empirical research, I'm a social scientist, and we look at empirical research showing that's not the case. It's contrary. It's contrary. In immigrant communities, the crime rate actually is lower. It's lower. So the problem is that when immigrants are aggressively and unfairly targeted by law enforcement, that could create a long-term issue, right? And the current administration, this arbitrary approach against the immigrants can a dark shadow on many aspects of social life, including criminal justice. And I believe the influence of such anti-immigration movement could shape the practices of law enforcement and also the outcomes of criminal justice process in the years to come. That's because today's discriminatory treatment of immigrants could result in tomorrow's wrongful conviction, and that influence the very basis, the ideals of our country, that is equality, that is fairness, that attract generations of immigration to this country, and they are here because we supposedly have a fair and just society.
Hold the mute button down.
Okay, so, well, let me just, because we don't have that much time left, does anyone have any questions or comments they'd like to make? Oh, come on, anybody upstairs? Yes.
I have a question. You made some comments about the correlation between guilty plea cases. And my name is Ida. I work at the State Appellate Defender's Office. I run the DNA project there. So I have a lot of cases dealing with this backlog of rape kits up the church. And I'm seeing a very clear pattern where kit goes in for testing, defendant pleads guilty, lab is informed not to proceed with testing, testing is done later, years later, and now we've got new pieces of information that we never presented that could lead to an exoneration or just lead to something that could create questions in the trial. So you mentioned the correlation between the guilty plea and the innocence work. What is stopping us from providing the same service of testing if we had a wealthy client, right, a wealthy defendant who could pay for outside testing, would have done that, would have found that information? Why aren't we as a state pushing for testing in all cases, because that's concrete DNA evidence as we're treating it now. We'll say concrete about any kind of science, right? But right now, that's considered good science, right? DNA testing, rape kits, all of that, we're believing in it, we're pushing forward for more information, but we're not providing that service. So I don't know if there's a way to address that entirely, so just like erase it.
It's a good question, and I think quite different for DNA testing and drug testing. Drug testing is cheap, it's simple. There are a lot of counties which don't allow people, or where the position of the prosecutors is that people are not allowed to plead guilty, at least not plead guilty to any significant amount of time in drug possession cases, unless the drugs have been tested. On the other hand, as far as I know, if drugs aren't tested before guilty pleas, Harris County was almost unique in having a relatively steady pattern of testing them afterwards anyway. And that's why we know about these cases. There would be a trickle of exonerations over a period of about 7 or 8 years, and then a new person was appointed as head of conviction integrity in Dallas County, and she noticed them, and she started looking around and found there were a bunch more than anybody knew about. The paperwork was getting lost. Nobody was following up on them, etc. For drug testing, I just don't think there's any justification for it. Rape kits, well, you know much more about it than I do, but the backlog of untested rape kits in the United States now is what the estimates for the total in the country, what, hundreds of thousands. These are expensive tests. These are tests that cost hundreds of dollars each and can be more expensive depending on what you're testing and how many different tests you have to run, and whether you're producing information that can be used for searches in computerized databases, CODIS, computerized databases. And they take time, unlike drug testing. We may be moving to a period in the future when DNA testing can be done almost instantaneously, but it's not here yet. That that would be a big investment in money, and it is heavily worth the cost. But as you know, at least as well as I do, the criminal justice system is simply pitifully underfinanced. And so, would we send people away for decades of their life with outdoing basic investigations without providing decent representation and without spending any time whatever on cases in court? And the tragedy of what happens on untested rape kits, one of the better examples of that, but it's not the most common. The most common is probably terrible, ineffective investigations by the police and ineffective representation by the criminal defense attorneys who are not paid, not able to do the job they should. And that affects people regardless of innocence, because a lot of people will do something with punishment they don't deserve.
That sort of reminds us that the flip side of not resolving these cases is that the injustice of impunity, not just wrongful conviction, is a problem.
As a heavy user of the NRA, I should know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you keep a running overall ratio, call it X, for the chances of an innocent black person to be convicted versus an innocent white person? Have several crime-specific ratios. Do you keep an overall ratio? And do you also have an overall ratio for women versus men?
It's I don't think that exact figure, that figure is what, it is one that we can have, the likelihood of an innocent person being convicted. In any context, except very limited context of death sentences, because we simply don't know how many people who were innocent were convicted. We only know the ratio, the number who exonerated. So we then make guesses based on the pattern of exonerations, which assume that the exonerations that occur, and that we know about, because exonerations happen that we don't know about, the exonerations that occur and that get enough attention so that we learn about them, are distributed reasonably equally by race, and that's probably not true. How it's not true, I wouldn't really want to speculate. I mean, you think that, as in everything else, racial minorities, especially African Americans, would get the short end of the